Montech's two brand new cases can be fully inverted in a matter of seconds. The HS01 Pro and the HS02 Pro coming in between $130 and $140. Alternatively, you can get them without fans between $100 and $110. Internals are identical apart from the mesh front panel and the ability to mount 3 fans. But today I'll focus on the HS02 Pro. For the front I/O, we have 2 USB Type A, we have a USB Type C, 2 audio jacks, we have a LED button and a power button. This case features a panoramic view of the PC inside with the front and the side being tempered glass. The rear of the case fairly standard, except we do have a power supply extension up here. We also have 2 rear 120mm fans, and I don't know if this is going to be an issue, but it is my first thought that popped to mind. How am I going to get a screwdriver onto these screws? It looks like they've come up with a solution, but we'll dive deeper into that. Tell Microsoft to bugger off and get yourself Windows 11 CD keys for 1/10 of the price. Who keys have a big sale on, and you can use my code IFR25 to get 25% off with loads of payment methods. Copy your code and paste it here to activate. You can even grab Office for your PC for dirt cheap. Don't pay a reoccurring subscription. Use code IFR25 for 25% off. Links are in the description. All WhoKeys software products are on sale right now. The top panel is magnetized on. It has a leather strap, so all we have to do is pull up on that and then we have full access to the top section. In fact, I quite like this top section because if I need access to, let's say, the fan controller in here, I could actually reach my hand in and plug something in. Now the rear panel has a slit up the top. All I need to do is push on that and it releases. One interesting thing I noticed about this is the power supply has venting either into the case or out through the back panel. Personally, I would like to vent out through the back panel to keep that heat away, but the option's there. Now with the power supply in place, you can see the power supply itself has a grill. Then this mesh panel goes on top of it. So already we're restricting airflow. But then on top of that, we have the back panel going on, which has way smaller holes. So you've got mesh upon mesh upon mesh, which really restricts airflow. Now the rear panel here has support for 2 3.5-inch drives. So you place one here and one here, or you can have 4 2.5-inch drives. 2 here and 2 here. My only issue is they didn't include any screws to screw the SSDs in. That seems kind of odd. Access to the power supply requires 1 screw to be removed. Then you simply pull this tab down. It actually holds itself in place as well if you don't want to fully take the panel off. However, you can just lift it out of its slots. Now, as you can see here, the power supply section has plenty of venting going around the top here, but doesn't have venting down the bottom. I can see why they did this, but I also feel like it could have been a bit more thought in mind down here. Now, they've obviously done this to hide the cables. I can see that clearly. If they had carried this design down here, it actually would have given us access for more ways to mount a reservoir. Currently, this case is a little limited in how you could mount a reservoir. So just providing those extra holes actually gives us another way. But that's nothing a drill can't fix. Up the top here, we have another panel held in by a screw. So remove the screw, remove the panel. You have access to the fan controller and RGB. Now, when I'm looking to build a PC, cable management is one of the biggest things for me. I want to make sure there's plenty of tie down points, which this case has all around the motherboard tray. I want to make sure there's plenty of grommet holes, which we have up the top, down the sides, even down the bottom here to route underneath. But one thing they do better is they provide all of those panels which actually hide all of the cables. So that is definitely a positive in my book. Now for the power supply bracket itself, it actually supports SFX and ATX size power supplies. To install an SFX power supply, all you need to do is flip the bracket 90 degrees. Some things to keep note of when choosing a power supply for this build. You cannot use a power supply like a ROG Thor as an example because it has a thicker grill on it. You can only use your standard 85mm thickness power supply in here, otherwise you are going to collide with the cover plate once you install it. Now in saying that, you may be able to get away with a bit more thickness if you leave the cover plate off. 85mm thickness puts this power supply right up against the edge, and even still, it barely wants to close because this power supply has this little badge right here that is sticking out just a little bit. However, we can get away with it because once we screw this down, it's not gonna move. In terms of power supply length, you've got about 200mm to play with before you will start seeing any type of obstacles in the way. The first obstacle you will come across is actually this slant that is built into the case. Our front and side glass panel, they are 2 separate pieces. So for the first one, just push on it with the little slit up the top and then pull it out. Same with the second piece, push, pull it out. By removing the glass panels, you actually see the implemented RGB a lot more. It's a frosted type of plastic, and it runs along the front side and the side of the case. Now, the case itself can fit up to an ATX size motherboard with a standard width of 250 mil. You can't go any bigger. In order to get our ATX size motherboard installed, we'll actually have to remove this cable cover right here, and the screws are located on the rear. Alternatively, the case also has full support for the back connect motherboards as well. That right there bugs me a lot. I want a nice seamless curve on that 24 pin. Unfortunately, it's going to come out and then have to go down because the hole doesn't line up with the 24 pin. Now, I cannot remember or not if the slots vary on some motherboards, so the 24 pin is down a bit more on some, up a bit more on others. But I think what we should have done here is perhaps cut this hole a bit bigger just to cover majority of motherboards on the market, then it would have been all sweet. Kind of like what they did here, right? The slit goes all the way from the top to the bottom, so it covers every single possible design layout, and I think that should have been up the top as well. Now, onto the rear fans. Straight up, I'm gonna say I don't like this design at all. These back fans are actually removed by removing 2 screws from the top, then the panel just slips out like so. Now, I just want to show you guys this, but in the specs, Montech specifically says that the rear can hold a 120 millimeter radiator. And here's what I dislike about this design. If this section here was completely cut out of the case, did not exist, but instead it was this back section that we just took off, and the case just came out and straight into that, you could mount a radiator to this all day long. But because we have this panel here, it is limiting us because the screws won't work. They won't go through these holes. Now, I could do some drilling, of course, but there's a lot of people out there who don't want to touch their case. So in my opinion, this back panel is a missed opportunity. Now, they say you can fit a 120 millimeter radiator on here. Let's have a look. You can't put it on the inside because it's actually colliding with the screws coming through down here. You can't put it upside down because it actually hits the roof and all of the holes do not line up. Not that we could get a screw through there anyway. You can't put it on the outside because, again, the screw holes don't line up. And second of all, the radiator is actually too thick to fit on the outside. And this is the thinnest one we have. So I'm gonna have to go against Montech and say that no, you can't fit a 120 millimeter radiator at the rear here unless you do some modifications. One other thing to consider, guys, is on this back panel, if you want all of your fans to be exactly the same, you can't actually use any daisy chain fans. Any with a little connector that connects up the top there will not actually fit inside of this. This cage right here is so snug on the fans that all you can really do is have connectors coming off the side of the fans and up and out this little slot right there. Now, according to Montech specs, you're only able to fit a 120 or a 240 millimeter radiator down the bottom, and I think they're selling themselves short. I actually reckon that I could squeeze a 360 millimeter down here. Now, the problem is the radiator is not going to be under the fans, so you won't have RGB on top. The radiator has to sit on top of the fans because, again, they've done that type of cutout where the fans are actually down below the case level. Whereas if that radiator bracket was actually level with the case, you could put the fans on top or below, it wouldn't matter. Let's have a go at fitting a 360 radiator. So if I try and install our 360 radiator this way, it's not gonna work because it collides with the edge and whatever this little bracket is right here. If I switch the radiator around, however, we have plenty of room on the left side here. On the right side, we still have this little bracket here. Now, this little bracket is causing us some issues. Now, if I actually remove this little bracket, it's there to hide a screw and a cable. But now, when I go to install my radiator, it actually fits. So if you really wanted to, in this case, you can fit a 360 millimeter radiator. This is actually a wide one as well. So you'll be able to fit heaps of brands, and you could definitely fit a 120 and a 240 if the 360 fits. However, we're going to run into some issues up the top. Now, even though a 360 millimeter radiator is within the specs of Montech's case, unfortunately, you have to be careful with the width of your radiator. This radiator here currently does not fit. Now, I'm not just talking about water cooling, you need to think about your AIO cooler as well. And as an example, I have a thinner Corsair radiator right here. This is an XR5. And as you guys can see, it lines up perfectly and it fits nice and snug. Now, the problem lies right here. if I had an extra 2 mil, this radiator would fit. So you really need to be careful about the width. Now to give you guys an idea, you only have 127 mil worth of clearance before you actually hit something. Now this particular radiator right here is 129 mil, so it's 2 mil too big. This particular radiator is 119 mil, so we have 8 mil worth of clearance. One thing I also want to point out here is you need to be careful with the width of your fans as well. As you can see here, the width of this fan actually comes further than the radiator, and this fan is a little wider than your standard fans because it's got the built-in RGB as well. However, I now have no room to route the cable behind it. I'm wondering if I could take it off and squish the cable through, but then this part of the cable also has a sleeving, so it's getting thicker and thicker. And unfortunately, I've got no place upwards to where I can route it and no place here where I can route it because the power supply goes in there and there's no hole. Now, I was a little worried about GPU installation when I first looked at this case, but taking off the front panel revealed these slits here. So we'll be able to get our screwdriver in quite easily. So let's go ahead and install our GPU. Now the GPU we're using for today's system is the Power Color Red Devil Spectral White 9070 XT. Yes, they finally have a white version of the Red Devil. Now that we've got the graphics card installed, we can actually talk about any clearance issues. Right now we have a 30mm thick radiator installed, and I would say that that is perfect for the bottom slot. Now with this particular GPU, you could get away with a 45mm radiator provided that you use low profile fittings. I'm talking something like this as opposed to this. There's a matter of millimeters before we touch the GPU. Now of course, the size of your bottom radiator is going to be highly dependent on the thickness of your GPU, and of course every GPU on the market is different. For example, if you had a water block on this GPU, you'd be able to fit a 60mm thick radiator. So it really depends on what you're after for your build. If you plan on a CPU only loop and you want to put a radiator down the bottom, then I would suggest just a 30mm radiator. But if you're water blocking it, you can go all out, put a 60mm radiator in there and it'll be just fine. Now for this particular build, my first point of contact for the top radiator is actually going to be the top of the RAM. And it doesn't matter whether you have a low profile RAM or a higher profile RAM just like I have, it will collide. Now from the fans to the top of the RAM, I have about another 60mm worth of play, so I can pretty much fit any radiator on the market. So measuring from the radiator bracket to the top of the RAM, you have about 111mm worth of play. Now as far as GPU clearance, I'm not worried at all about this case. You can fit up to a 420mm long GPU. Now there is no GPUs on the market that are that length. You're just getting ready for the next generation of GPUs. If you are worried about your GPU sagging, the case does come included with this GPU anti-sag bracket. You just install it into one of the holes at the back panel, but I don't think our GPU is sagging too much, so I'm not going to worry about it in this build. Now, did you know that with this case, we can actually do a vertical GPU layout? But what does that mean for us in terms of cooling? No more bottom radiator. Now, another issue I've just realized with this case, flipping this to vertical mode, is that if you want to access the screws, you actually need to remove them and install the GPU before you put it in the case, or the much easier thing to do would be to remove this whole fan bracket up here so that it's not sticking out over them, install your GPU, and then put the fans on afterwards. That's something else to consider. To vertically mount your GPU, all you need to do is release 2 screws on the rear, rotate the bracket 90 degrees, and screw it back in. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you guys, the vertical mounting feels like an afterthought. There's no bracket in place to help the GPU actually sit up straight and give it some stabilization. And even the anti-sag bracket, it's way too short. So in vertical mode, you couldn't even use this. I had one that was either longer or a part that you could connect to it to extend. That'd make all the difference for vertical mounting. So personally, I don't really recommend vertical mounting your GPU. Now let's talk reservoirs. There's actually not a lot of room in this build for a reservoir at all. I do have a couple of options because of the design of this case. Now keep in mind, if you had a water-cooled GPU, the water block would probably end about here and it would give you more options. You'd actually be able to use the bottom mounts on the radiator to mount the reservoir. However, with an air-cooled GPU installed, we don't actually have that option, and we've only got this space to work with beside it, which is about 80mm for this particular GPU. However, what I'm really liking here There's all these cutouts up here. I'm thinking that's a perfect spot for an FLT 120 pump res combo. Now, if you didn't want to do a FLT pump res combo, I'm sure you could actually mount a tube reservoir to here as well. And from the bottom of my fans to the top of the GPU, you have about 212 millimeters worth of clearance. So it will be a pretty small pump res combo. Now, because we have a little bit of extra space on this back panel here, if this bracket was not there and it was just the fans, I would have said that this also could have been an opportunity to mount an FLT 120 pump res combo on this back wall. But obviously we can't do that with this in place. So I think for now we're limited with those two options with the size of our graphics card. Now I'm gonna be real honest, guys, for $139.90, let's just call it 140 bucks, that's what it is. If I was ending the video right now, I don't think I would be entirely happy with paying $140 for this case, especially from a water cooling perspective. If I was just air cooling, yeah, it's a great case. Well worth it if you actually like the aesthetic of the fans being flush with the case instead of sticking out. But we have a whole nother layout. Let's see if that can convince us. Now, to switch this into reverse layout mode, all you need to do is unscrew the 4 feet, place them on the opposite side, which is now your new bottom, put the dust filter back into place, which is magnetized, and then pop in your magnetized top panel, then it's all complete. None of the specifications of the build have changed. Every single spec and number we went through is exactly the same. The only thing we would need to do is flip this around, because you obviously want a body of water feeding the pump. And then you need to think about your fan layout. If we kept the fans the same, we would now have the hot air pushing out the bottom and the cool air coming in from the top. So if we want to flip all of those fans around to change our airflow, then that's also something else to consider. $140 for this case is okay. I'd put it right in the middle of the stack of cases. It's not a terrible price, but it's not amazing at the same time. For water cooling, this case is a no-go for me. For air cooling, I think this case is pretty good. The features that make this case more pleasing and aesthetic for air cooling are its downfalls for water cooling. Now guys, consider subscribing and hitting that bell notification. And what features did you like about this case? Is this something you'd consider? And check out this video on screen right now where we took an ordinary case and made it look absolutely epic. Thanks for watching.